In January 1929, people in Poland began dying in their sleep. They went to bed, covered themselves the way they always had, and just never woke up. At first, families blamed illness, then age, then bad luck. But when it kept happening in cities, in villages, in barracks, something became impossible to ignore. The cold had crossed a line. That winter would go on to become the coldest in Poland's recorded history. And by the time anyone understood how serious it was, the country was already trapped inside it. Poland was still assembling itself. Poland in 1929 was technically a nation again, but it did not yet feel like a finish-it-own. Independence had returned in 1918, ending more than a century of disappearance from the map. But the land itself still carried the scars of being ruled by different empires for generations. Infrastructure did not align. Railways stopped abruptly where borders had once existed. Electrical systems varied from region to region. Even legal codes and timekeeping differed depending on which empire had controlled the area before the war. Large parts of the country lived without electricity. Heat came from wood or coal. Cooking came from fire. Light came from fire. When winter arrived, survival depended less on institutions and more on habits learned at home. Knowledge passed quietly through families. Fathers taught sons how much wood to store and how early to start cutting it. Mothers taught daughters how to layer bedding, how to seal windows with cloth and paper, how to ration food when roads became unreliable. These methods had worked before. They had carried people through difficult winters, shortages, and war. They were not built for what arrived in 1929. December does not raise alarm. December began without drama. Snow fell, melted, then returned again. Rivers slowed but did not stop. Trains ran late, but late trains were normal in winter. Markets stayed open. People complained about the cold and adjusted their routines in small, familiar ways. Fires burned longer in the evenings. Wood piles shrank a little faster than expected. But no one felt urgency. There was time to cut more wood. There were still deliveries coming. Farmers noticed small changes that felt easy to ignore. Water buckets froze more quickly overnight. Animals drank less often. Stable doors stayed closed longer in the mornings. Nothing about December felt unprecedented, and that familiarity made people patient when they should have been alert. Cold, when it arrives gradually, teaches people to wait. January breaks the pattern. The change became impossible to ignore during the second week of January. Rail workers outside Warsaw found switches that would not move at all, even after hours of heating. Fires were lit beneath metal housings. Hot water was poured. Tools were used until hands went numb. Nothing responded. Temperatures dropped and stayed down. Frost clung to windows throughout the day. Ice no longer retreated when the sun appeared. The air burned the lungs with every breath, and skin exposed for even a short time began to stiffen painfully. People waited for the familiar rhythm of winter to return, the brief thaw that usually followed a harsh spell. It never came. High above the Arctic, weather systems locked into place and refused to move. Cold air pushed south and stalled over Central Europe, while Atlantic warmth weakened long before it could reach Poland. Each night took more than the one before it. Each morning felt heavier to endure. By mid-January, much of the country lived under temperatures below -20 degrees Celsius. In the east and south, the cold pushed further still. -30 was no longer remarkable. In some villages, thermometers dropped beyond numbers people trusted, and residents judged the cold by how quickly pain set in instead. The cold changes how people live. Extreme cold does not announce itself with noise or violence. It changes behavior first. Movement becomes careful, and touch becomes deliberate. People learn quickly which surfaces burn skin and which can be handled briefly without injury. Breathing slows because the air itself hurts. Faces disappeared behind scarves that froze stiff with breath. Eyelashes clumped together, and beards collected ice within minutes of stepping outdoors. Speech shortened because opening the mouth too long felt dangerous. Inside homes, fires burned constantly, yet warmth never filled rooms evenly. Heat stayed close to stoves and vanished a few steps away. Walls contracted and cracked as materials shrank. Windows iced over from the inside, turning daylight into a dim blur. Sleep became uncertain. Someone always remained half awake to tend the fire, because letting it die overnight could mean hours of work in the morning, assuming hands still functioned well enough to relight it. Mistakes stopped being minor. A single lapse could cost fingers, toes, or an entry night's warrant. Warsaw starts losing control. Warsaw did not collapse all at once. Control slipped away as one system after another failed. The first strain appeared in fuel. Coal delivery slowed as rail switches froze and locomotives struggled to start. What fuel still arrived was redirected toward essential buildings, forcing hospitals, power stations, and homes into competition. Even priority shipments became unreliable as engines refused to turn over, and delays stretched from hours into days. Public transport failed next. Trams froze mid-route and were abandoned where they stopped. Ice buried tracks faster than crews could clear them, and commuters walked when they could or stayed home when they could not. Factories soon followed. Machinery cracked under thermal stress, lubricants thickened, and power outages spread unevenly across the city, leaving districts in darkness for long hours. Water systems failed quietly. Pipes burst overnight, flooding apartments that froze solid by morning. Some residents tried to melt ice indoors, starting fires that spread through buildings already blocked by ice. Hospitals merged wards to conserve heat, postponed surgeries, and worked in coats and gloves. Cemeteries closed when the ground could not be broken. On the surface, the city still functioned. Beneath it, the systems holding daily life together were coming apart. Villages reached the edge faster. In rural Poland, there were no buffers. Wood stoves burned without pause, and fuel disappeared faster than families had planned for. Nearby forests became difficult to reach as roads vanished beneath snow and hardened ice. Tools failed under the strain. Axes shattered, saws jammed. Hands lost sensation quickly. Livestock losses mounted early and relentlessly. Cows collapsed in barns, unable to generate enough heat to survive standing still. Food storage failed in ways that were not immediately obvious. Potatoes split apart as ice expanded inside them. Grain cracked. Seed stock meant for spring planting became unusable without anyone noticing until it was too late. Families slaughtered animals earlier than planned, not because they wanted to, but because keeping them alive was no longer possible. Frozen flesh resisted knives, turning butchering into slow, exhausting work that had to be done carefully to avoid injury. Wood effectively became a form of currency. Fence posts disappeared first, then furniture. Sheds were dismantled. In some villages, coffins that had been prepared for future burials were broken apart and burned. Survival overrode ritual, and no one spoke about it aloud. Isolation became as dangerous as the cold itself. Families that shared fuel and labor lasted longer. Those who tried to manage alone disappeared quietly. Rivers become roads, then threats. The Vistula froze more deeply than anyone trusted at first. Ice thickened until it carried people, carts, and animals. Crossings shortened travel. Trade routes shifted. Markets adapted quickly, and confidence grew as weeks passed without incident. Pressure built beneath the surface. Ice jams formed where currents slowed, trapping water that continued to move unseen below. When brief thaws arrived, the ice shattered suddenly, releasing floodwaters into low-lying homes, barns, and storage sheds. Hours later, temperatures dropped again. Flooded buildings froze solid. Walls split open. Floors buckled. Belongings remained sealed in ice until spring, inaccessible, and often ruined beyond repair. What had seemed like a solution became another hazard, one that arrived without warning and left permanent damage behind. Death comes without warning. This winter did not announce its casualties. People failed to wake up. Elderly residents froze in their beds. Children collapsed during short errands. Homeless residents vanished and were later found beneath stairwells, carts, or snowbanks, often days after death. Military units suffered heavily. Frostbite destroyed hands and feet. Treatment itself caused damage as frozen tissue shattered under pressure. Amputations followed, sometimes weeks later, when infections set in after temperatures eased. Records failed to keep up. Villages stopped reporting. Churches filled faster than registers could be updated. Historians would later estimate that thousands died in Poland alone, with many more surviving with permanent injuries. The cold did not just kill quickly, it followed people into spring. The cold refuses to release its grip. February passed without relief. March arrived frozen. April followed reluctantly, and when temperatures finally rose, The damage became visible all at once. Fields remained locked, tools cracked, livestock losses made plowing impossible in many areas. Food shortages followed almost immediately. Prices rose sharply, bread lines lengthened, markets grew tense. Riots broke out in some cities. Soup kitchens overflowed. Charities exhausted their supplies. The government struggled to respond. Poland lacked reserves, and international aid was limited as the global economy slid toward collapse. Recovery depended less on policy than on endurance. Why this winter stayed with people? Poland had endured harsh winters before, but this one arrived everywhere at once and drained people before relief could come. Infrastructure was young. Emergency systems barely existed. Communities were forced to rely on themselves, and the outcomes varied sharply. Places where fuel, food, and labor were shared lasted longer. Places where families remained isolated did not. The lesson was simple, and it stayed. Memory hardens. The winter of 1929 did not become legend. It became reference. Older generations measured every severe winter against it. This is cold, they would say, but it still isn't that year yet. Homes built afterward changed. Walls thickened, cellars deepened, heating systems multiplied, warmth returned. Trust did not. What 1929 exposed? That winter stripped life down to essentials. Money lost meaning. Skill mattered more than status. Community determined survival. Remove heat, food, and movement, and comfort dissolves faster than people like to believe. The winter exposed margins that were always there, just rarely tested. Nearly a century later, homes across Poland still have thicker walls than strictly necessary. Many still keep backup stoves that are rarely used. Families still plan for cold that may never return, because once a country learns how quickly warmth disappears, it never fully trusts comfort again. What failed first, the cold itself, or the systems meant to protect people? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe for more real history. Until next time.